Is this on? This is on. All right. Thank you all so much for coming out today to the Spring Symposium. I always look forward to this every year, as do many people on campus. It is our opportunity to showcase all of the interesting work that students have been doing every year. This is the 25th anniversary of this event. We're calling it the 25th annual, even though it was canceled for COVID, but it has recovered from that, and it continues to be one of the great events at EOU. So to welcome you here today, I would like to introduce EOU's president, Dr. Kelly Ryan.
Hello and welcome, everybody. It was really great to see you piling into this theater, nervous energy, well-dressed, everybody wearing your lanyards. I'm really, really excited to be with you at this momentous event. I'm certain many of you are experiencing those pre-presentation jitters, but don't worry, I'm not going to take a long time. I'll let you get to your work. Particularly Ellie Justice. Ellie, where are you in the audience? Yes, I was just saying, wow, how neat to present to this large group of students. That's a really wonderful, wonderful thing for you. So welcome to all of our EOU students, those who attend here in person and online, as well as our Oregon Teacher Pathway students. Greetings as well to my fabulous colleagues, the faculty and staff in the audience. Thank you so much for being here. Students, I just really want to take a moment to acknowledge the work that you accomplished that brought you to this moment. I know getting to the point where you're able to successfully deliver your research or creative project was a hurdle, both intellectually and personally. It took strength, and it takes courage to get you here. You showed up, you did the work, and it resulted in a massive research or creative project. The evidence is out there in the hallway. Completing your project required resilience. I am certain that you had other major priorities in your life, and you had to find that balance and deal with the everyday and perhaps for some extreme challenges of being a student. The funny thing about life is you don't always know when something momentous is happening to you. You don't recognize until much, much later what moments truly transformed you. The truth about today is that you're probably always going to remember this day and the project that you completed. Your passions, your questions, the hardships, all of it is going to make you into a very successful adult. I still remember all of the work I did as both a graduate and undergraduate student. Some of it good, some of it not great, but in both cases, the work made me a better thinker, a better communicator, and a better dreamer. Your presentation here today will make your project even more memorable. So even though you're nervous, try and take it all in. You stepped up, you did it. And those are keys to success. And I'm really, really proud of you for stepping up and getting this done. I want to give a shout out to our organizing committee, which included Steve Tanner, Kevin Roy, Tanya Lubez, Jacqueline Morgan, and Kevin Walker. Thank you as well to Chris Martins in the events office, the AV crew who are helping to stream the keynote, and the provost's office, support from Angie Adams, who's helped us get to the finish line. Speaking of support, students, you have been supported on your journey to this conference by faculty. They helped you hone in on a topic or theme. They made you do this project. They focused you on getting the best evidence. They maybe helped you when you couldn't figure out what to do next. And they pushed you, and they pushed the boundaries in your current comfort levels in areas of persuasion, presentation, and creativity. To all those faculty who sponsored student presenters, you have my deepest of gratitude. This is the work, isn't it? Will the faculty in the audience please stand? Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. In the same vein, A very special thank you to those districts, schools, and teachers who support the Oregon Teacher Pathways students in their work. They're doing the work to make sure future generations of Oregonians are educated as well. And finally, I want to thank the family and friends of our students, some of whom may be with us today. Your support made this event possible. While you're getting smarter today, listening to each other's presentations, I hope you'll have some fun. One thing that I always share with others is that I truly believe there is so much joy to be found at universities just listening and learning. Today is an excellent example of what universities do best. We expand minds, we deepen horizons, and we search for the truth. Please hold that in your hearts as you go throughout the day. Next up, Mr. Daya. Thank you.
Hey all, thanks for coming. My name is James Dyer. I'm a professor in the English department, and I'm here to introduce Ellie Justice and her presentation, which is based on her senior capstone project. I had the pleasure of meeting Ellie last semester as a student in my Literacy, Discrimination, and Power course, and after our first week, Ellie caught up with me after class and asked if I would give her feedback on her senior capstone project. It's about equity and justice, she said. And since this was something that I was really interested in, obviously teaching the class, she thought maybe that I'd be a good faculty reader. As students in the audience, I feel like some of y'all don't fully understand how excited we professors get when you take the themes and ideas that we cover in class and use them to create something new. It's an affirmation that our goal as an institution of higher education is to stimulate the imagination and intellectual curiosity of our students. As scholars, we professors spend approximately 1,000 years of our lives to become experts in one specific, very specific subject. And perhaps this is somewhat paradoxical, but how can we feel anything but pride when a student forces us to reconsider that which is familiar to us in ways that absolutely blows our minds? And that's what Ellie did with her project for her senior capstone. In the end, for me, it didn't even matter that Ellie's paper was on the topics of Shakespeare's Othello and cap and trade environmental systems, two things which I know absolutely nothing about. I was proud and excited that she had taken kernels of ideas that we talked about in our class and used them to chart her own path. Over the past semesters, I've gotten to know Ellie, which is why I know that listening to me relentlessly compliment her is something that's going to drive her absolutely nuts. But here we go. Ellie's extraordinary scholarship transcends disciplinary boundaries. Using knowledge and experience acquired from a dual major in agriculture and English, she has spent her time at EOU doing things like analyzing Bram Stoker's Dracula through the lens of soil science. She has spent her time passionately arguing in papers for the relevance of contextualizing works of classical literature in order to make them accessible to students in rural schools. And while most doctoral students would be perfectly content in developing a whole cloth, a novel approach to analyzing works of literature, Ellie has always had her eye on the real world, constantly seeking to resituate classical literature as active and applicable to real-world issues of equity and justice. Ellie's work defies the boundaries that are so often imposed between STEM and the humanities, and exemplifies what we aspire to as scholars. With that, I'm proud to introduce Ellie Justice as this year's Spring Symposium keynote speaker.
Hello. Hello. Okay, just making sure everyone can hear me. I get kind of anxious with microphones. I'm not super used to this. So to begin with, As James wonderfully announced me, my name is Ellie Justice, and today I will be presenting on drowning cats and blind puppies, examining the lack of equity within Shakespeare's Othello and cap-and-trade environmental systems. Well, you're probably all like, how in the world does drowning cats and blind puppies, Shakespeare, and cap-and-trade all work together? Well, to really understand that, we first have to talk a little bit about my background. So, sorry, we're going to talk about me for a second. So, as it has been reiterated, my name is Ellie Justice. I'm from a small rural town in eastern Oregon called John Day, Oregon. And I come from a family that's rich in agriculture. I grew up on my mom's plant commercial nursery, so I was around plants most of my life, and grew up on a commercial cattle ranch where we ran 300 head of cattle. This in turn has really influenced the way I see the world. Through nature, through animals, because all in all, it's all connected to me and is the backbone of who I am as a person. Well, also, I was always really into reading, probably because my father would read tons of survival stories, which is why James will tell you I have the taste in literature, when it's not classics, of a middle-aged father. Sorry, Dad. But my love of classics really didn't happen until I was about in middle school. I was having an identity crisis. I was just not very good at most things. Everyone was better at everything, and I was like, oh my goodness, what am I supposed to be? What am I supposed to do? Nobody understands me. But when I started to read my very first Shakespeare play, which is Midsummer's Night's Dream, I came to the realization that I didn't struggle too much understanding Shakespeare. I didn't get the dirty jokes, but I got the major concepts. And the idea stuck with me: if I can understand a man that most people have told me that I can't understand, maybe there's a slight possibility that if he was alive, he could understand me. Which is why Shakespeare is so integral into my path and why I examine things the way I do. So, as James stated, I've been a double major. I'm actually through 2 different institutions. I'm getting a degree in general agriculture from Oregon State University and a degree in English/writing from Eastern Oregon University. When I first came to college, I was originally just going to be an ag teacher. I had a really great ag teacher in high school, and I wanted to do all the FFA stuff because that was a big part of my life in high school. But all along, I really wanted to be able to minor in English because, first of all, I really love Shakespeare. And I figured if I had to teach another subject, English was going to be the way to go. My very first OSU ag advisor, I want to stress that because my current ag advisor is amazing, and she's here, and I love her, told me that that was the most ridiculous thing she had ever heard, that ag and English don't mix, and I should just give up on that dream. So when I first was looking at taking an aesthetic art appreciation course, she gave me 2 options: art history, which I really did not want to do because my dad has horror stories of his art history classes back when he was in college, and Shakespeare. So Shakespeare was the natural choice, where I met Dr. Nancy Knowles, who's on sabbatical now, who later, after some pushing from people in the OTP program to talk to her, encouraged the idea of becoming a double major. This has really led my research, being her pushing me to seek ways to connect agricultural science with the literature I so much loved, so very much loved. This in turn has really influenced my project, but it's important to note that cap and trade, the main topic we're talking about with Othello, would have not been even in my scope if it hadn't been for my high school ag teacher who was preparing me for public speeches on the topic, and my Econ 201 class I took this fall with Dr. Peter Maley. So, you're probably wondering, where in the world does the drowning puppies come in? Well, it really arises from this line: come be a man, drown thyself, drown cats and blind puppies. Growing up in an agriculture community, the concept of people drowning unwanted cats and puppies was not a new concept, but not really a concept I fully had to face until I met Joey and Butch. During Thanksgiving, a little while ago, my sister and my father went to go get hay. My mom was telling them that she has the cutest puppies. There's one with the bright blue eyes. She's so cute. You have to see him. Well, my dad has a thing for big, shaggy black dogs and asked, well, I heard you had some shaggy ones. Can you show me? Next thing we know, they're grabbing the two puppies, showing them to my sister and my dad, when the lady said, well, at least somebody likes looking at them. D-Day's coming. We can't afford to feed them. There's 7 puppies. So we're going to have to do what we find humane, which is to drown them. So next thing we know, my mom is having a very awkward conversation with my father about how we ended up having 2 puppies coming home. Joey is now my dog and my best friend, and I talk about her excessively. And when I was in my capstone project class, I was like, what in the world am I going to do? And while I was walking, I once again thought about Joey's origins. Because Joey and Butch have a lot of problems because of the environment they were raised in. There were 7 puppies that had to fight each other for food. So even though they're not in immediate danger, the damages are still there. Joey is afraid of other dogs. Butch is afraid of people. And Joey also eats excessive amount of yard lights. It's a significant problem. This in turn made me think that just because we move people out of immediate danger and say they're not in danger does not mean that the danger isn't still there, which is the very concept of cap and trade. When we're in this environmental system, we tell people we're protecting them from the pollutants, which I will go further in detail about, don't worry, that they're safe. But in truth, we're just sacrificing the most vulnerable, which is what Iago is truly saying. He's not talking about literally murdering puppies. He's talking about for the success of an individual, it is better to sacrifice the vulnerable, which unfortunately we see. So this is just where the presentation is moving forward. It's just important to talk about this briefly. So we'll talk a little bit about classical lenses and how agriculture and natural resources fit in that, as well as the economic theory behind cap and trade, because that's important for the project moving on, as well as asymmetrical information, which is an issue within cap and trade and the play, as well as the lack of justice that's associated with it, that causes the inequity. So, real briefly, as you can tell, there's a lot of classical lenses, and they're all great. Unfortunately, sometimes we like to shove literature analysis into a box, that you can only be this. But what I really appreciate about interdisciplinary work is it allows for the conversation of multiple lenses at once in a way that's transformative, not theoretical. It's just been the problem with literature all throughout, at least literature analysis. So cap and trade is an environmental taxation, carbon emission taxation system, which sounds like a lot of big fancy words. So when we talk about pollution in the terms of economic, we always want to go for the optimal level of pollution, which is where the social risk, so the social health harm issues, sorry, that came out wrong, is equal to the benefits we get from pollution, because believe it or not, we do need some level of pollution to function. So there is some benefit. And cap and trade is a way to move towards this optimal level. Companies or individuals, it depends on the system, it's a little unclear, have the right to buy and sell carbon points. They're only allotted a certain amount, but if they need more or don't need as more, they can engage in this market. This in turn results in the amount of carbon credits being reduced each year till it reaches the cap to what we consider the optimal level of pollution. So that's a little bit of the theory, which is important to talk about before we talk a little bit about the play. I am not going to go into all the intricacies because I could spend way too long. I spent like a 2-page thing just summarizing the play. And also, it is kind of painful for me to sometimes say these names. I'm really bad at pronouncing some Shakespeare characters' names, but don't worry, we'll talk a little bit more about it. Essentially, what you need to know is Iago is jealous of a guy named Othello because Othello does not give him a promotion. So, doing what anyone would do when they're told that they don't get a job offer, he goes on a vengeful spree of destroying the man's life, which results in pretty much everyone dying, except Cassio, the guy who was given the promotion, and Iago. So as we got a little brief summary of the play, we need to talk about one of the theories in place, which heavily influences it, which is asymmetrical information, which is an economic term. I want you to imagine a used car salesman. Okay, that's what you need to imagine, where the information is not equally distributed between both parties, which allows for an individual to engage in a deal that they think is going to be equal and beneficial for them, but really is not that great of a deal. So, within the play, you're probably like, how does this term work? Well, the asymmetrical information is through the concept of a choice to engage with the decisions within the play. So, Cassio, real briefly, if we forgot, Cassio is the guy who got the promotion. Iago is our villain. We'll talk about Iago a lot. Rodrigo's the henchman. Desdemona is Othello's wife, and Othello is the guy he's trying to ruin the life of. So, to set the scene, we're at the wedding. Othello and Desdemona have just gotten married. And Cassio and Iago are there, and at weddings, people typically drink. However, this is a problem because Cassio is a massive alcoholic, which Iago knows. So, Iago has a little scheme that Rodrigo, as soon as he gets drunk, will get him in a fight, which will lead to him be removed from his position, which Desdemona, who's friends with Cassio, will defend him, setting the scene for a perfect affair. But he can't do this if Cassio doesn't drink. So he keeps telling Cassio, 1, if you don't drink, it will be rude. 2, if you want, I can drink for you. Well, after belittling the man, he doesn't really have a choice. He has a concept of a choice. But in truth, Cassio doesn't. So, things work out just the way Iago wants. Which, unfortunately, is what we see within cap-and-trade environmental systems. But before we really go into a real-world example, it's important to discuss a little bit more about how asymmetrical information works within these systems normally, on a theoretical level. So, within various systems, there's a lack of information, whether or not it's companies or individuals acting within the market. But even whether or not you are directly tied in, you are still forced to engage in the market. You still have to pay the price within it. And it's important to note, in some systems, it is just companies and corporations that are functioning. But what about your independent farmers, your independent agriculturalists? They aren't given that right. They're treated just like a company and held to the same standards as a giant power plant or a giant infrastructure, which causes lots of issues. And there is unclear conditions, language, laws, and bills that creates a situation where individuals are really unsure of their role within the system, which results in a lot of issues we see moving forward. But when it comes to the concept of a choice, which we briefly discussed, we see this within our own state of Oregon. In the year 2020, a lot of things happened, as we all know. But maybe you guys might have been aware of the big logging riots, the agricultural riots in Salem over House Bill 2020, which is the cap-and-trade bill. Obviously, there was a lot more to it, a lot of weird stuff. It's a very integral bill that I did read for a class with Dr. Corey Brewster. I can summarize it. So during this time, a lot of agriculturalists got angry Because in rural areas, we created a condition where the only sources of work, the main livelihood of our people, is within natural resources, natural resource extraction, and agricultural-based work. This policy would have caused a lot of issues for the machinery needed, the operation, and the livelihood of these people. So a lot of loggers and ranchers and producers, you might have known some, I have known some people that were up there, gathered in the streets of Salem to have their voices heard because they had felt that they had not been heard in a very long time. Well, a lot of people pushed back on these protests, telling the people, leave it, it's up to the people, just stop influencing people. It's for the people. Well, was it really for the people? Because maybe you don't know how it happened. I was kind of left in the dark. The bill failed, but Governor Kate Brown still pushed the issue through because it was an environmental emergency. But was an environmental emergency for a system worth the livelihoods of individuals within a rural community, especially when we're told we have a choice, that the government, our representatives, are supposed to be representative of the people if they just go and do whatever they were going to do to begin with? That's asymmetrical information because we're told we have a choice. But instead, really what's going to happen is people are just going to pick what they were going to begin with. So this brings up, is there really justice within the system? When I think of justice, I know this sounds a little egotistical. I tend to think of my last name. I think it's a pretty cool last name. Thank you, Dad. But when we really talk about justice, it's important to talk about that justice is the fair treatment of all parties involved and the retribution of seeking fairness, which there can be a lot of debates on justice, but for the time being, that's the definition I'll be using. So you're probably like, how does this work for the rest of the play? We've talked about a lot of crazy stuff, but the lack of justice is a very prevalent issue within the play and the systems itself. There's this line within Othello that asks, "Are there no stones in heaven? Then what's the reasoning behind the thunder?" Might have botched that a little bit. I'm not Othello nor Shakespeare, so please apologize. Please pardon me for that mistake. That line's really important because at the end of the play, Othello has been tricked into murdering his wife because of an affair. Everyone is dead and dying, and Othello is chasing down our bad guy, Iago, just a reminder. And he's crying out, asking God, why in the world did you allow this to happen to me? Why does he get away with it? And why am I left in suffering and pain? Why did everything happen? To make matters worse, he gets arrested for the murder of his wife, and he doesn't get to avenge her death, and he stabs himself. Othello's story ends with him killing himself, and we're set on stage with Cassio, who somehow miraculously survived after some failed murder attempts on him, and Iago. And we're left with this uncertain ending, where a ruler comes and tells Cassio, hey, you know how you survived this tragedy and like all this horrible stuff happened to you? You need to torture this man to death. Well, that's great, I guess, but we don't see Iago die. We're left with Iago being left on set, nothing happening. But is that really justice in the end? Because quite a few people died because of this one man and his being mad because he didn't get promoted at work. I feel like this sounds like American Psycho. Sorry, I just read that, so it's kind of in my brain. How can justice happen if everyone who's been wronged is dead? So when we say this, alternatively, when we think of Iago's death, we can state that it's a tragic act. Because in truth, Iago's not really the villain of the play. As I've been stating, it sounds kind of paradoxical. Sound of sounds kind of ironic, me saying that now, I'm sorry. In truth, the real villains of the play are all of us, because the audience, the society, created the conditions that allowed such a tragedy to happen, that allowed Othello to feel uncertain with his marriage, his interracial marriage to a white woman, that allowed the discrimination towards addicts. In truth, we're all to blame, and this is a societal issue that's reflected within the play. Unfortunately, people dying, everyone being left dead, is not just a tragedy that we see in the play, but a tragedy we see in real life. Cap and trade is a little messed up. It has a lot of good points, and it has a good purpose that it originally came out with. And I acknowledge that, and we want to be wary of protecting our environment. But California has proved just the lack of equity and injustice within the systems. Marginalized communities are significantly more likely to have pollutants pumped in their areas. These companies, to offset their carbon, some systems require them to do good within the system, like planting trees. Oftentimes, these companies will do it on their own property, which, because the poor areas sometimes sell their carbon to the companies, it just gets pumped and doubled, and the health risks are more likely. As Lori Mays states in her article, we can see that the particle pollutions are higher in these areas. This in turn results in Black children in these areas 10 times more likely to die of asthma-related issues than their white counterparts. Can we really say it's justice if Black children are dying more likely in these areas than white children? Or can we really call it justice? Some people are like tort law, which, if you don't know, it's where people have to pay for the damage they've done. That's a really simplified version. It's been a while since I've been in business law. But is the payment of a child's life enough? Then what amount is enough to pay the life of a dead family member? A dying child? What's enough payment for a relative living with chronic health issues because of this environmental push? What amount of money is enough to help the rural agriculturalists who can no longer do their work, pay their bills, to feed our country if the bill stops them from doing their job? Where is the justice? And that's kind of the unfortunate thing about this project, is there really is no happy ending. There really is no ending, because there really is no justice. This, unfortunately, is the sad truth when you examine things in this way. There isn't always a perfect solution, but using lenses that use different parts of your knowledge allows for the space to create and have these conversations. Cap and trade, as a lens for Othello, allows us to have conversations about the lack of equity within these systems, the lack of equity within rural areas, marginalized communities, and have powerful conversations about gender, race, and socioeconomics, and point out the manipulative tactics that are not just pieces of fiction, but things we see within our own governing societies. So, as I've talked about and James has mentioned, there is a lack of scholarship. There is a gap in this literary scholarship, oftentimes gatekeeping previous works and causing a bit of a rift in allowing the space for interdisciplinary studies, which is unfortunate because interdisciplinary studies allows the space to have conversations that aren't just theoretical but transformative. Well, I just want you guys to think, I know some of you guys are going to be future educators, the OTP program here, and students and faculty. The importance of just allowing yourself and others to think outside the box. Allowing your students, even if they say something you find completely crazy and you can't find a connecting point, understanding that just because you don't understand doesn't mean it doesn't work. That their work leads to transformation and allows for conversations that might not have happened or might not have happened in the way if we didn't allow that room to grow. So I'm going to end with some advice my dad gave me before going to college. And this isn't just some of his random advice on how to manipulate vending machines or on the weird literature I have read because of my father. My father really honed down the point that it's important to seek outside your major. As he said, it's important to do something outside of your major, something that uses the other side of your brain, something that allows you to create and have fun. This is how you are successful in college. Though I will edit my dad's thing a little bit. That's how you're successful in life. Because if you put yourself in a box, then you're going to be kind of square. You can't move outside of your own boundaries. If you don't accept of all the weird and quirky pieces of who you are, allow that to be in your work. Allow that to be you. Allow people to see you for who you are. Before I end, I do want to say thank you to some people who have been really wonderful in my research and making this project possible. So thank you, Dr. Knowles, Dr. Nancy Knowles, Dr. Jennifer Slinkard, Dr. Corey Brewster, Professor James Stolen, the soon-to-be Dr. James Dyer, Dr. Francini. Sorry, Francine, I can't say your last name very well. My friends, my family, you guys have all been the reason why these projects, you've really encouraged me to use all parts of me to discuss issues that are very important and I think we don't talk enough about. So if you guys have, oh, here's all my sources. It's really tiny. I kind of ran out of room, but I didn't want to have multiple slides. Sorry, there's a lot on there. You might see Taylor Swift on there. My original paper talks about Taylor Swift and her jets. I didn't think that would be very fitting for this presentation, but if you want to ask me my opinions on Taylor Swift and her jets, I can talk to you about that. So, got to end it with some Joey picks. So if you guys have any questions.
Thank you very much. If there are questions for our speaker, I've got a microphone up here I can pass around. Any questions for Ellie? Yes.
Nice job, Ellie. Through this blend of lenses in your research, do you see any examples of this broken system mending, maybe in a work of fiction, since you did address it a bit, or do you feel like a rewrite of the system may be the only option?
I think that's, you meant the environmental system, right?
Yes.
Okay. I think that's kind of the tricky thing because unfortunately, no matter what, we're going to have adverse effects and groups of people are going to be hurt. But I do believe we kind of need a system that isn't just run on the monetary gain of companies and that people should have more of a say as well as people being allowed to be educated and informed. I think that's the really tricky thing because we're kind of stuck in a situation where there isn't a lot of options, but I think we also need to have these conversations with all groups of people, not just politicians. Like our agriculturalists, the people in these communities need to have a voice and the say of what happens when we talk about environmental policies, but that's kind of the tricky thing is somebody's going to get hurt no matter what. But I think it's better for these large corporations that have to take a little bit more of a hit than our small town farmers and our marginalized communities. Sorry, I know that's not a super great way to answer it, but it's kind of a difficult way to find a solution for a problem that's probably not going to go away.
Other questions? Go ahead.
Yeah.
Oh. So the question for those people listening at a distance, the question was, is there a particular reason why you chose Othello of all of Shakespeare's plays?
So I originally was not going to choose Othello because I was walking and thinking about it. This was my plan B. My original project was going to be talking about Measure for Measure, which is a really cool play. I love my problem plays in particular, where I was going to be talking about the domination of Isabel's body through soil science and basic property law, because it's basically a story. It's a story about a guy who wants to rape a nun. I know that's a really simplified version. That was what I was originally going to do. I was actually avoiding Othello because I thought the only conversation I could have was about race at the moment. And I kind of felt like I was probably not the best person to have that conversation. Especially with the idea I had, it was not working. And then I was walking and talking with my dog because I have a problem. I think she talks back to me. She sometimes does. She usually eye rolls at me. But yeah, that's the whole reason I picked it, was it just kind of came, and I kind of ditched my other idea, but eventually I'll try to write that paper. I think it's a lot of fun.
And we probably have time for at least one more question, if there is one.
There's a little bit of complexity there. Not that I'm against teaching or anything like that. So currently I have a job with the Forest Service where I do a lot of presentations like this about environmental. I think the plan is to work in NEPA for a little bit, which is environmental policies and educating the public on what's going on with the forest. But I think at some point I might go back into teaching, but if I wanted to be completely honest, I'm really passionate about the idea of college education, because I believe if we're going to teach our next generation of teachers to accept students of having these different lenses, it's important to work on the collegiate level to start on that work. And plus, I really like to write really weird papers with alarming titles, and I don't think I can do that in the high school setting as well. My students might be a little mortified.
Any other questions? All right, then let's thank our speaker again. And to the rest of you, enjoy the rest of the symposium.